All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar sponsored by the CTE Technical Assistance Center of New York. A few technical points before we begin. All attendees are initially muted. We will take comments and questions throughout the webinar. To pose a question, click the raise your hand icon and you will be announced and unmuted. You may also submit a question to be addressed by typing it into the questions pane on the control panel. All questions are logged and unanswered questions will be addressed by today's presenters via email. If you become disconnected, please call us at 518-723-2137. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing on the CTE Technical Assistance Center website at nyctecenter.org within 72 hours. If you have questions or suggestions regarding upcoming webinars, please contact the Technical Assistance Center at ctetac@spnet.us.
Thank you, Gretchen. This is Dick Jones. I'm sure within the audience we've got some people that have attended our series of webinars around the Career Instructional Model. And I'd like to welcome you back and also welcome some new people that may be sitting in that just have a specific interest in this topic on engagement. I hope that you're keeping warm where you are. It seems like we're, again, in the depths of this very cold winter and affecting large parts of the country. My panelist today is Mark Barnes. I'm going to be introducing Mark a little later on to share with you some of the practices around this challenging aspect of engaging students as independent learners. This series of webinars is all around the Career Instructional Model and the 6 elements that make up that model that describe the kinds of instructional practices that we feel will contribute to students becoming career ready. It really brings together the research, brain research, and a lot of our prior experiences from model schools to focus on essential aspects of instruction. It really is future focused and not teaching as teachers have taught in the past, but focusing on the future needs of students. It's intended to focus not only on career readiness, but college readiness and the kinds of characteristics that students need. It also focuses on increasing rigor and relevance. And those of you that are familiar with the rigor relevance framework and high rigor, high relevance defined as quadrant D learning, the kinds of skills and knowledge that students are going to need to be successful in their future. A teaching mode that gets students to high rigor, high relevance really reflects a lot of the elements in this instructional model. And the nice part about it, it applies across all disciplines and all grade levels. These are practices that whether you're a career and technical education teacher, an academic teacher in secondary schools, or an elementary middle school teacher, these same kinds of principles apply toward good instruction. There's a one-page handout that provides a useful reference for those of you that want to be able to refer to the model and the 6 elements and each of the 5 actions that make up that element. So on the screen is the URL that you can download that particular handout, and it's a useful reference. But also on the Technical Assistance website is an extensive list of references and resources and links to the webinars that we've developed, and I'll share that again at the end of the webinar. There also is a Twitter feed called Career_Model, and that's one of the Twitter tools that I use to share constantly resources that I come across and ideas that are useful to teachers to continue to deepen your understanding and application of the 6 elements in the model. Our agenda today is similar as we've done in others. We have about a total of an hour, but we want to make this engaging as we talk about engaging as independent learners. I'm going to review a little bit of background on this particular element and then engage in a conversation with Mark to share some of the practices that he's learned in how we can add engagement to instruction. And we want to engage in some questions and discussion. And so anytime, as Gretchen said, you want to raise your hand or type a question in the question pane, give us a question, and Mark or I'll be happy to respond to that from our experience. This is element 4 in the model, engage as independent learners. And in each of these webinars, I've had a preview that of a short video that I wanted you to watch to kind of introduce the topics. And one that I came across recently that I thought was excellent for this particular topic was a video called 10 Expectations, which is a group called Leaving to Learn that works with the Big Picture schools. Some of you may be familiar with their particular initiative. And this is really a great video piece. And here's the link from YouTube to download that. You could also search and quickly find it with the term 10 Expectations. But I hope that some of you had a chance to look at that video. So let me just ask you in our first polling question, how many of you had the opportunity or the chance to watch that particular video? So just respond on the screen right now. Got the results, Gretchen? About 50-50, 46% of you had a chance to view it. So just to make a comment about the video, and Mark and I talked about this a little bit, may make some references to it. We talked so much about expectations for students, and what this video does in an animated fashion describes 10 expectations that students really have for good quality instruction in the classroom. And that's really essential to move toward good engagement. Let me pull up on the screen now. Here are the 5 actions that make up this particular element. And in the surveys that I'm going to talk about at the end of the webinar, for teachers to reflect on the aspects of their instruction to contribute to this element includes these 5 items. The first one is about relationships. That has to be first. The relationships is so key to working and engaging students. I've had the opportunity to think and talk with a lot of educators over the last several years around engagement, and a couple of the publications I wrote were on student engagement. And so many educators echo how important relationships are. Students aren't going to put forth effort and become engaged unless they feel that positive relationship. And relationship positive from peers around them. It's not just the student relationship. So while relationships is not the fundamental purpose of education, it's a necessary ingredient in creating an engaged classroom. The second element is one that I have many conversations with teachers around, and that's having the routines and procedures that keep students on task. In early grades, we do a good job with focusing on routines and procedures to get students accustomed to school, but I think sometimes later on we forget to follow some of those, and it is absolutely essential to make sure that you have clear routines, essential that all of those be the same from school to school, but within a school, having some consistency so the students see some consistency in those routines. And it's a matter of eliminating those distractions that keep students from being on task. The third action is from a teacher planning perspective to using a variety of active learning strategies. Some things that we do as teachers are naturally more engaging than others. And we need to make sure that we're using a variety of tasks. A variety adds interest, but also making sure that we're focusing on those things like cooperative learning, like the use of technology, like student discussion, that really more actively engage the students rather than putting them in the position of being a passive learner. The fourth action here is about personalization. The reason that some students don't get engaged is that they fall behind in their learning, or they may be bored, that they've gone too far ahead and mastered the material very quickly. And to keep a class of students fully engaged, it's a matter of finding ways to personalize the learning. And this includes some of the good differentiation practices, but it also involves the planning from a student perspective, from a teacher perspective, to get to know your students, to be able to make some adjustments, and to have the kind of feedback from students to know where they are in meeting your learning objectives. The fifth action is a little beyond this notion of engagement, but I think it's a natural connection, because what we're after is to get students engaged to learn, but we're trying to build a commitment with them to be lifelong learners. We use that term. And if they're active and engaged now, they're going to likely to continue that level of engagement in their education. But we want to make sure along the way that we've taught students the kinds of transferable information and study skills that will enable them to be that productive learner, not just to have an interest in learning, but to have the skills to be that continuous learner, to take in new information, to process that, to maintain focus in what they're doing. So those are the 5 elements that make up, or 5 actions that make up this element of engage as independent learners. This notion of engagement versus independent might seem a little bit of a paradox, that they may compete against one another, and this cartoon kind of illustrates that. They have high expectations for independent, innovative thinkers, but expect the students to follow everything they do in the classroom. And we need to recognize that we're engaging students not just behaviorally and expecting them to hand homework in on time and show up for class on time and have their pencil, but that they are emotionally and cognitively engaged. And that has to do with the way that we introduce the curriculum to students. So let me ask you a couple of poll questions about these 5 actions. As you think about these, first poll question is, if we're trying to get students career ready and succeeding, which of those 5 elements do you think is most important in helping students become career ready? Everybody make your response. Variety of responses. Tied for the top on this. Mark, I don't think you can see the poll results, can you?
Yeah, I can.
You can, good. Okay,
Yes.
Building positive relationships and teaching transferable information and study skills were both 44%. And then, so that's far and away where most people responded. Interesting. Okay. Next question relates to these same elements. What action do you think is the greatest challenge for teachers to accomplish? We want teachers to work on these. Which one do you think they really struggle with? Gretchen's got the responses up. Oh, pretty easy first choice here. Personalizing learning to meet individual student needs, 76%. And the only other responses were around active learning and transferable skills. Well, we need to work on personalization. Thank you for your responses on that. Let me formally introduce Mark Barnes, that's joining me today as a panelist to talk about this aspect of engagement. And I thought Mark would be an excellent candidate to do this. Mark's a successful teacher, but now a former teacher that he's embarked on sharing the things that he's learned as a teacher. I often talk about the importance of teachers writing about their work in that regard, and Mark certainly has done that. So as a teacher in the Cleveland area, Mark recognized that he needed to do some things differently in the classroom to better engage his students. He's written a couple of books about that, and now working, sharing what he's learned with other teachers around the country. So welcome, Mark, and thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Thanks, Dick. I appreciate it. I'm really happy to be here, and anytime I get an opportunity to talk about the change that I went through as an educator, I get very excited, and you'll see that I have no problem talking about that because I taught a long time one way, and it got to a point where that way really didn't work very well, and I knew that something had to change. So I decided to do that, and boy, was it exciting.
Would you just share a little bit about how that transformation occurred as you began to rethink your teaching?
Yeah, I taught for over 20 years, and I taught middle school and high school English language arts, and I was very much what I call a traditionalist in my methods. When we're talking about engagement, and I was certainly not the kind of teacher who engaged students. I was the kind of teacher who kind of taught at them in that very traditional way, sort of stand and deliver. And I would lecture for 15, 20 minutes at a time, sometimes longer, much to the chagrin of my 12 and 13-year-olds. And and then it was just the other classic ways that I think we're taught to do when we're pre-service educators is, we practice, use workbooks and worksheets, and just a lot of methods that aren't very fun. Learning was not fun, and I made no attempt to make it fun, and told kids, you're not here to have fun, and you're here to learn, and do it my way, and everything will be fine. Otherwise, you will do poorly. And that was the way that I had learned to be a teacher, and that was the way I taught. And it took a long time. I mean, I was good 14, 15 years in before I started tinkering with some different ways, because I just felt things weren't going well, and had a really bad year where I just knew that I wasn't reaching kids. And I took a summer to sort of reassess and said, things have to be different. And I did some research and decided that I needed to make some heavy changes. And I think some of the slides that I had coming up, Dick, maybe talk about some of these things as well. We want to just these are the books I wrote after my change. I probably should have put this at the end.
Put those at the end. We'll come back. We'll come back to those, Mark.
That's great. That's a good idea. Thanks. So anyway, what I did is after doing research and all, I created what I call a results-only learning environment. And I don't know, create, it's probably not the best word. I changed things, and what this is really about is engagement and student learning, and a lot of those action items that you talked about that I was not good at before. Relationships. I mean, I love that, and I know on the one poll question, so many people felt that was such a key one, and I was really not very good at that. And I think it's difficult if you're in that traditional mode as a teacher, that sort of stand and deliver person, to really be good at relationships, because students tend to look at you as one thing, this sort of delivery person, and you're not bringing them pizza, which they'd like to have. You're just handing out information the way you think it should be delivered. And I was very good at that. And once I got to the point of engaging kids and building rapport and working on relationships and trying to involve them in the conversation and say, what do you want to learn about? Or if we have this learning outcome, how would you like to do it? I created something that looked a lot different. I think I might have that on another slide or two if you want to move forward, Dick. I don't know if you want to interrupt me or not. Feel free.
Go ahead.
So, one of the things, and again, I think we're talking about these things today, and looking at these action items, I really believe we're talking about these things. As far as routine, I think we have to be really careful about how we talk about routine. I think routine is an important thing when it's done right. You know, for me, in the traditional way of teaching, routine was some boring bell work assignment built around a worksheet or a workbook activity. So, you know, walk into class, break out your workbook, connect the dots, fill in your multiple choice, and the kids just didn't like it at all. And for me, what that was is it was just a crutch. It was a way of getting kids to be in their seats. And you know, what I went to in these interactive lessons and getting kids engaged more, it does create more of a sense of chaos, but it's a good chaos because the kids feel like they're really in the center and they're at the part. I love this slide because, you know, the teacher's off to the side. And that's something that I really learned is important, is to, you know, that it has to be less of me and more of the kids. And that worked really well. So the routine became, you know, you come in and we'll have something, but it'll be something engaging that you'll really appreciate, and you know, it'll ignite learning. And that's the kind of routine I think is important. Let's go to the next one, Dick. You know, again, I mentioned control chaos. You know, in the old days, I never wanted my kids out of their seats. And you know, these next couple of slides, I've actually got some pictures I took in my classroom the last few years after I changed the way that I taught. You know, I really became a shutterbug, to use a classic word. You know, I just walked around with my smartphone in my hand, and because there was so much more of kids working and so much less of me in that stand and deliver. I mean, you talk about engaging. I love this one because these are kids that, you know, they're really involved. The kids on the side are watching, and off the shot, there's just an amazing amount of different things going on. If you walked by this room and stuck your head in, you know, the average onlooker might go, wow, that's kind of a crazy environment there, or boy, they're out of control. And really, there's a lot of engagement going on. And in the old days, I was afraid of it, and then I learned to embrace it, and boy, learning took off. You can go to the next one. I know you mentioned collaboration was one of the things that came up in the action items too. You know, about transferring skills. I think one of the keys in having transferable skills is the idea that we do need to collaborate. There's a great deal of research now that I read when I was researching for my books about collaboration, and how in the business world, you know, we talk about college and career readiness. There's been so much going on with those topics, or with relation to those topics lately, because business people are saying we're receiving people that aren't ready, even those who come out of college. And one of the biggest things, a very interesting study done within the last 2 years, where small business owners across the nation were surveyed, and they were asked, what's the biggest issue you find with people who come in and work with you? The #1 response was that they don't know how to work together. They can't collaborate. They're not independent thinkers. You can't give them a project and say, you and you and you take this project and work on it independently without me standing over you. That they struggled with that. I think that's a product of the old way that I taught, and I think a lot of people still teach, that sort of traditional, you know, stand and deliver, practice, homework, test, repeat. And instead of this sort of engaging collaborative environment. I think I might have
Mark, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question about that, and it goes back. I think about an experience I had many years ago when we were introducing an inquiry teaching strategy to a group of teachers, and we videotaped a 5th grade classroom where the students were really asking great questions about this observation of earthworms in the classroom. And unfortunately, we began to show that around to a lot of teachers, and we thought they'd be inspired. And the most common reaction was, oh, she had good kids. My kids could never do that. How do you answer that question when a lot of teachers will look at it and say, well, the reason you can have good collaboration is you've got good kids. My kids could never do that. I'm not going to turn them loose.
Well, you know, one of the things, I love that question, because I used to be the person talking about good kids versus bad kids. And I think that's, first of all, one of the things we have to be really careful of in education is labeling students in any way. You know, first of all, no kids are bad. I mean, there may be kids who are not as good at school as other kids. And you know, I don't, even in terms of good, I mean, I think they're all good in one way or another. But in terms of academics, which is really what I think that's about, I think when people say they're good kids, they mean that they're good at school. You know, they tend to come from homes where learning is encouraged, and they come in and say, okay, I'm here and I'm ready to learn. I think as far as the kids that maybe might be labeled as bad kids who are not ready and not always willing, you know, they've got a lot of baggage that makes them that way. And you know, we could get into a whole different philosophical discussion about the influences of poverty and, you know, socioeconomics on learning. But what I have found is that the kids who might be labeled as bad or who were not the good students were the ones that typically brought that negative baggage into the classroom, and they weren't interested in learning. They certainly weren't interested in the kinds of things I did as a traditional educator. I can tell you that this environment, the one that you see on this slide, engages all kinds of kids. Again, trying my best to stay away from the labels, I had a very heterogeneous mix of kids when I was teaching in this environment here. This picture was taken just, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And you know, I had kids that were considered honors level students, and I had kids who were considered remedial students. I had kids with all kinds of learning disabilities, emotionally disturbed students. So you know, I had the gambit, I think, of kids, and I can tell you that you wouldn't be able to tell which one of those were in this picture. What happens is when you engage kids in the appropriate learning opportunities, they become more interested. You know, is everyone going to take the reins the same exact way? You know, probably not. But what I found is, and this was my favorite part of transitioning in the way I used to teach to what I call results-only learning, which is really a student-centered, you know, digitally enhanced, project-based classroom, is that the kids who were the most reluctant, who in the past I used to try and engage with the old ways and they hated it, became very engaged when I put them in this environment where they could collaborate with others, where you gave them a wide array of tools. You see computers in the back. I have beanbag chairs that are not in the shot here. You know, I mean, when you create that sort of environment, kids get really excited about learning.
Was the technology a necessity, that you had to have the technology in order to make some of these changes?
Well, I think technology is a necessity today. You know, I mean, is that to say that you can't teach without it? No, because, you know, I think there's still educators who are faced with, you know, not having enough of the technology, and who have students who maybe don't have as much as other kids do, but they want it. You know, kids are using the internet, no matter what background they're from. They are using the internet, they're playing games, they're using mobile devices. So we have to do everything we can to meet them on that playing field. You know, in this class here, you see in this slide, you know, I had 4 computers, and I mean, my average class size was 30. So, you know, it's difficult to get everyone doing the same thing, but you really have to learn to be creative and do it. And in the past, I wouldn't have done it. I remember a time, boy, this is a story I'm a little bit ashamed of. There was a time years ago when we first started getting computers that I was in a class and I had either 1 or 2 computers. And I told my principal before the school year started that I wanted her to take those out. I said, those are just a distraction, because, you know, I've got 25 or 30 kids And what am I going to do with those computers? And if I let one or two of them on, then everybody else wants to be on. It just creates havoc in my class. And later on, when I realized that the technology is your friend, I was doing everything I could to get computers. And in my last year, actually, before I left the classroom, the principal moved me to what had been a computer lab, because it was almost like a gift. She didn't know I was leaving the classroom yet, but it was almost as if she's saying, I'm going to give you this gift in your last year. She said, I know you do so much with technology, and this room's available, if you want to move your class, which is always a big pain. Teachers don't typically like to do that, but I couldn't move fast enough. So, I think the technology is important. I think if you're strapped and you don't have a ton of it, you do everything you can. I mean, when I had this room, I rotated my kids almost every day. And I would get, we worked very hard. You talk about routine, and I said, I think there's a good routine and a bad routine. We got very good at the routine of rotation. And soon my students got to a point where they didn't need me. Boy, I really like that. I always say, I know my kids are doing well when they don't need me. And they got to a point where, 4 kids could be on, and they had a certain thing they needed to do and to accomplish. And when they got it done, they rotated off. Now, if they were engaged and they didn't move, there was occasionally times when I would say, hey, you got to move out and let someone else in. But we got really good at that. And I mean, I could get 12, 16 kids a day in a 50-minute class on computers, and then the next day I'd say, okay, you guys weren't on, it's your turn. And really important to do that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I interrupted you from some slides. You got some more you want to cover here?
I think I might have one or two more.
We've been talking about the devices.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I think we can go past this one, but this just really sort of exemplifies the difference in old school and new school. In the old school, I would have never allowed a kid to have a device in class. One of the things about results-only learning, and what I think we're talking a lot about today with engaging kids and getting them to learn in ways that are different from what we're really used to, is to take a look at a lot of the methods that we've used for decades, or heavens, almost a century or more now, and sort of reevaluate those methods. And that was something that I did in my own transformation that was very difficult for me, because I think when you get used to that, the old way, it's difficult to change. When I'm out presenting, I have a slide, I don't know that I included it today, that has the abbreviation on it that stands for "that's the way we've always done it." And I say, why, if we know that old methods don't work, why is that? And I put that slide up and say, I think it's this, and most people tend to get it. That's the way we've always done it. Well, I realized that I needed to do it a different way. When I did that, one of the things I did was, first I started cutting back on homework, and then eventually eliminated it entirely. Doesn't mean kids don't work out of class. I get a lot of pushback on this when I'm out in front of teachers, and one of the things that's important is to change what you do into something that's more effective, and to realize that change is necessary. That was something I struggled with for a long time. I just kept doing things the same way year after year, and if kids didn't learn, I blamed them or their parents, because that was easy to do. Well, they're not interested, or their parents aren't pushing them. But I got to a point where I said, sooner or later, I'm the one who's in the classroom. I have to make some decisions. What will serve my population best? And I realized that a lot of the homework I was giving was useless. Kids weren't engaged in it. There's incredible research out there that says it doesn't lead to achievement. So ultimately, I just pushed it aside, and I started engaging kids with more project-based things and gave them opportunities to choose what they wanted to do. Suddenly, kids were working outside of class on their own anyways because they like to. So that's one of the things with engagement.
Yeah, that's great, that aspect of choice. And, we're always looking for a pat answer. And you say, well, should we have homework or shouldn't we have homework? It really is the teacher making judgments about the quality of the homework. Not all homework's the same, and what is working to get the students really cognitively and emotionally engaged. That's what we need to get after.
Well, that's a key question for sure. I might have one or two more, Dick. Assessment's another one that's really important to take a look at. I think that a lot of people would think that maybe this doesn't fit into the conversation on engaging students. They might say, well, they do stuff and I evaluate them and grade them. And what I realize that is assessment is a critical piece. And there's some great research by John Hattie, who's sort of a luminary in education now, on what truly leads to achievement. And one of the things he says right at the top of his list is involving kids in their own assessment, their own evaluation, having them become self-evaluators. And that was really a key for me when when I made a big change in how I do things. And I went in from one year to the next and suddenly changed everything. And I really stopped grading kids in the old way and really made it more of a conversation and provided them with some narrative. And then we did a lot of what you see in the slider, and I love this, really with the kid just really focused on what's going on, and that teacher saying, this is how we need to do this, and ultimately asking kids, how did you feel about this? What did you do right? What did you do wrong? What did you learn? And I think when you do that and you get away from the old school traditional style of grading, you really start to see kids take off as learners. So that was a big one for me.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because if we expect them to be independent learners, there's a time when the teacher's not going to be around to grade their work. They need to know whether it's quality work or not.
Absolutely.
And they need to practice that in school. Yeah.
For sure.
Well, that's the last of those.
Okay.
Let me put the Gretchen. We got any questions from the audience?
Yep, we have one hand raised. I was just about to interrupt you. It's from an attendee, Audrey OShea. Can't hear you. Audrey, did you have a question?
Oh, no, I just made a comment a while ago when we were doing the poll that if we had more than 24 hours in a day, we could personalize it for every student. But what do you do with limited time? How do you personalize it as much as you want to? You know what I mean?
Yeah, boy,
good point. You want to tackle that, Mark?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question. That's a tremendous one, and I know I get that a lot when I'm out presenting, especially when you start talking about feedback and engaging kids in conversation. That's one that really comes up a lot. A few minutes ago we were talking about homework. Dick said something like there's not a pat answer, and I think it's that way with this kind of engagement as well. I think we want there to be a silver bullet. I do a lot of these webinars. I do a lot of speaking out in front of people, and some guy who taught a long time and wrote a couple of books. I think people say, "Oh, well, he must know," and boy, do I wish I did. But my answer typically is that there's not a real silver bullet fix to that. We don't have enough time. First of all, time is a precious thing, and we really don't have enough of it. What I did is I used technology to help me engage kids as often as I could one-on-one. So what I would do is have kids write. And you can do this no matter what subject you're in. I think, a lot of times I get the science people, the math people say, well, we don't write as much. But you should. And there's really a ton of that in the Common Core now, where they're asking kids to write across all of the disciplines. I would get my kids blogging. I would get them on a website. I would get them in a notebook, whatever it is, and get them writing about what they're doing. Instead of just whatever the learning outcome is, instead of that, have them talk about it. There's your conversation. Have them answer easy questions like, what did you do? What did you learn? Why is it important? How does it connect to the real world? And then I would look at that work and immediately provide feedback as often as I could digitally. So my kids wrote on blogs. And I use Kid Blog just if you want a tool. We could talk about tools as well, but if you just want a quick tool, Kid Blog is for educators. It's a phenomenal blogging program, very easy to use. Kids as early as first grade can use it. And what I would do is my kids would be working, and I would engage with them while they were on the blog. So I'm either sitting at my desktop computer, or I'm in the center of a room with my tablet or my laptop, whatever I've got, and it's sort of like I'm a part of the class. And they're writing, and I'm reading. And I go in and I comment, and I leave the kind of feedback that they got used to. I would recommend a lot of that, and then find every opportunity to walk around and chat with kids anytime during class. My goal was always to have a one-on-one conversation no less than twice a week with every kid. And when you have 30 in a class, when I was teaching, I had 4 or 5 classes, so you were always looking at 115, 20, 25 kids. It's difficult to do, but if you get them working and they're doing project-based stuff and they're interacting collaboratively, and you get comfortable walking around, you can do it.
I think that's a good suggestion, Mark, that we say personalize and not individualize, and we're never going to have the resources or time to be able to have one-on-one instruction.
Right.
But I think just as if you can collect feedback regularly from students, you're going to be able to make some adjustments in the curriculum. And the big thing is to break that log jam of saying everything's got to be in whole group instruction, moving everybody along in the same activities at the same speed. You still there, Mark?
Yes. I didn't know if I was responding to something or not.
Another question for you. Where should a teacher begin to do this? You said you reflected over the summer. Do you have to start this at the beginning with a class of students? Can you make some adjustments for teachers that want to try and begin to move away from where they are, that may be very whole group instruction and very traditional? Where would you advise they begin?
Well, anytime you can start something fresh at the beginning of the year, it's great. But I wouldn't wait. I'm out in front of teachers throughout the entire year, and the last thing I would ever want to tell someone if I'm in a workshop is it's February and say, okay, well, let's get ready to do this in August, because I think you lose time and you lose the kids that you have. Why not jump right in? What you have to do is get comfortable with transition. I had a summer, and I changed. I was a different person when I came back in August. I had a new group of kids, so for them it wasn't any different because they didn't know me before. But my colleagues saw change. I was a completely different person in terms of how I taught. I threw out all of my old stuff. I didn't have any worksheets. We didn't use workbooks. We were using computers and the internet and web quests and just everything you could possibly use. And I wasn't grading and giving tons of homework. I just did it all because I just decided that's what I was going to do, and it was amazing and rewarding. I've had people say, I don't know, this sounds great, and getting kids engaged and doing what you do, but I don't know that I can do that. And, I always say, start somewhere, even if it's in one unit. There's a great video by David Jakes that you could find. You could do a Google search, and he's a really great speaker and educator, researcher, and he talks about that very thing, about kind of easing in. Pick something that you could do differently that would improve teaching and learning in your classroom. So, we're now about halfway through a school year. So, you've got most likely a whole second semester that you're working on. What could you do that you think would make a difference? Maybe what do you hear at today or at any kind of webinar like this, or something you read online or in an education book that you say, boy, that sounds like a really good strategy. I'm going to try and do that right now. I say do it. Don't wait. If you've been doing tons of homework and you hear me saying I don't think that's a good thing, and you say, oh, I'm going to research that some more, go in one day and tell your kids, guess what, for this unit or whatever, we're not going to have any homework. Well, I'll tell you, I had kids come to me all the time. They said, I don't know, you don't give homework and all the other teachers do. What's up with that? And I just said, that's just not a strategy I want to use. So I would say pick something and do it, because I think you'll be pleased that you do.
Mark, you talked about leading to your greater satisfaction as a teacher. What would you see in student results, achievement, measures that you're learning?
Well, you were breaking up pretty bad there, Dick. I think I got your question about achievement, right?
Yeah, I did. What did you see difference in student learning?
Well, the one thing is that I stopped measuring in the traditional way. So this is a question that I got a lot of. Another thing I did is I really cut out traditional tests. I would still do some things that looked like the old multiple choice tests or quizzes, but I used those really in a formative way. It was never to put a grade on a kid or to be used strictly as a way to evaluate how they learn something. It was, and I told them that. I said, this is for me to get a kind of a pulse of the entire class and how you guys have absorbed this material. And so they like that. For me, the best way to see that kids are learning is through that conversation, through observation, in as formative a way as possible. I would like to see us do away with as much summative assessment as possible, because and I mean that's obviously that's a tough proposition in the world that we're in right now with high stakes testing and standardization and those kinds of things. So I know anybody here is probably saying, "Whoa, how do you do that?" But I try to do away with as much of that as possible, and let the kids show their learning through over time, through projects that were really engaging and had a lot of fabric to them, and a lot of layers. So we would do things that I would say, here's 8 or 10 learning outcomes, where normally I might teach those one at a time, and then do some sort of practice and test or quiz. I got to a point where I said, how can I take as many of these as possible and roll them into some sort of a project that kids can really work on over an extended amount of time, and I can see that growth. And you can certainly know when kids have learned when they create, first of all. When you do mini lessons and you do those engaging things like we saw on that slide in the beginning, where I was, there was a video and the kids were surrounding the smart board and, were pointing and talking to each other and really engaging in learning whatever that skill or concept is. Then take that and say, okay, well, here's something we're going to create, or we're going to build, or we're going to write about, and we're going to demonstrate that we understand it. I could tell the kids were achieving. Now, if you just want standardized results, from one year to the next, the last year that I would call myself a very traditional teacher, where we did all of the test-taking practice and get ready for the achievement test in April and all of that, workbook, homework, test, 68% of my students passed the test. And the following year, when I threw out all those methods for the first time and became, what I call a results-only learning teacher, never talked about a test. Said, we'll do fine. When kids would even ask me, they'd say, what about the test? You'll do fine on the test, because you're going to learn the way we learn. You will become a good learner. My test scores went up to 85, 88% passing every year. So, I don't love that measurement of learning. But, if you're an administrator and you say, well, this is what we have to have, boy, they took notice. In fact, I had a principal come to me once and say, we want to take a look at what you're doing, because your test scores have just climbed so markedly. We really want to know what you're doing. So that was exciting.
Excellent comments, Mark, and that echoes what what I've heard and seen in classrooms. The best answer on this, I heard from some students, a really mature perspective on this. When you talk to students that are confident, independent learners, that you're confident they're going to leave school and be as successful, test scores become less important. But I was talking to a group of students in a school in San Antonio, and high poverty school, students coming from very limited households, but these students were so articulate, so confident about their future. And I said, I don't hear you guys talking about worrying about passing the state test in Texas. And one of the students said, you know, we don't worry about that. Our teachers have given us so many challenging things to do through the school year that the test is just one more thing we take care of. And I think when you talk about results and the results isn't our result to prepare students to be confident, independent learners rather than to get a test score? And I think the opposite of that, if we somehow drag students to a test score and they hate learning, have we really accomplished anything? And as we wade through all of this testing policy, I think we need to keep our eye on the important goal of what do we want to do for students and making them engaged learners.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Boy, I love Texas. I've had the fortune to do some work there this school year as well, and boy, they're really great. There was a school I worked with that has completely embraced the results only model, and I stay in touch with those teachers, and in fact we did a really cool thing a couple of months ago where we did a Google Hangout, and they brought some of their students in, and we just sat there and talked about, you know, this kind of learning. And it was great to hear those kids say pretty much what you just said, that, you know, they work more and harder than they ever have, but it's the kind of work that they value because they connect it to the real world. They said, you know, I'm doing this project, I'm doing that project, and it has so much meaning to me, and it's something I'm creating with my teacher. And then they talked a lot about the tests and all that the same way. We're not afraid of anything because we're learning. We talked about grades, which was really exciting, and they said, you know, I don't need to see points or letters on my work because the feedback I get from my teacher is so much more meaningful and important. So these are important things and to talk about, and, you know, hopefully this sort of discussion will spread. People like you are helping it spread, Dick. I appreciate it.
Well, that's great, Mark. And I've got a few things that I want to wrap up. I need a couple minutes to do that. But on the screen, obviously, we've shared the books that you've written that obviously go into a great deal of greater depth of the things that you've learned and are sharing. Any final things you want to add before I close off today's session?
Yeah, you know, I think if I could give a plug, it would just be for ASCD conference that's coming up in March. If anybody in your audience here are people who attend conferences, it's a fabulous place. I'll be there along with many other great authors, and there's so many great things coming out of ASCD. So if you're looking for a great conference, it's in LA if you want to go to a fun place.
It might be a little bit warmer too, right?
Yeah,
hopefully
for sure, and it might be a little bit warmer. Yeah, but that's it. So thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Mark. Really appreciate you and what you could share today from your perspective of things that you really discovered in the classroom. I mean, you're outside sharing examples now with a variety of audiences, but you really made this work in the classroom, and I think that story is a powerful one. This model, as we talk about today, and this element that we're focusing on today in this webinar of engagement, is part of what we're doing to get teachers to reflect on instruction. And we've created 6 surveys for teachers to think about. One of them, you can focus in on this aspect of engagement. How well are you doing in regard to that? And it'll give yourself a score, and you can begin to think about what you might be able to do differently, which one of these actions you might focus on. It's not meant as an evaluation. It really is a self-help tool, and just as Mark shared in his story, reflecting about his instruction, you can be a little bit more quantitative with the surveys. The surveys, for those of you in New York State, can go to the New York CTE Technical Assistance Center, nyctecenter.org, and navigate to the Career Instructional Model. You can click on any one of the surveys. The data is completely anonymous. You can even put in a fake name if you're unsure of the NSA grasping this information, or your principal. And it gives you a report and summary of rating on those elements that make up that particular aspect of the model. In addition, we've got a number of excellent resources, included Mark's books in that, but have a number of other videos and resources that you might find useful, reflecting on your own or collaboration with your colleagues. For those of you that aren't in New York State, we have the surveys available as well on our new Career Readiness Institute. These are still available for free. They'll be part of membership in the Institute down the road, but you can still go to carespnetwork.org and locate the surveys and take those as well. And it really is meant to be a self-help tool for teachers to think about their instruction. This is a series of webinars. We have 2 more remaining in the next 2 weeks on Empower and Rating Work Habits, and hope that you will tune in for those. Last poll question. Gretchen, are you there to able to do the poll question today?
Yes.
We had trouble with this last week. Okay, let's try this. What else would you like to learn more about the career model, or like to have in the way of resources? So we've got a number of choices up here, and you can check more than one of those of things that you might be interested as we think about services that we might bring under the Technical Assistance Center. Get everyone to respond. We'll get those poll results up. Variety of responses. I'd like to see some more video examples and some webinars. I think people find the webinars valuable. We've tried to make this more interactive with the video beforehand, and we'll continue to look at doing some things in that regard. So appreciate your suggestions on those. As a final comment, just talking about ways you can use the survey, they can become some personal reflection. Talk to some teachers that are going to use those as part of their professional portfolio. And that can be an artifact for those professional portfolios. It can be a pre-activity for a professional development workshop. What a great way to stimulate a conversation, to have everyone do one of the surveys and come together with your professional learning team to talk about this aspect of engagement, or to talk about assessment, or to talk about adding relevancy to your curriculum, whatever that topic is that you're interested in. So multiple ways that you can use the surveys as a professional learning tool. We're going to continue to work on these. I'm fashioning a paper, maybe a book, Mark. I keep juggling my priorities around. I think this has been a great experience the last few months putting this together. But we'll also be developing some video resources and some other assessment tools as teachers try to incorporate these into your instruction. But Mark, thank you again for taking the time to be with us this afternoon, and thank you, the audience and participants, for joining us today. Have a great day, and make sure you stay warm and safe out there.
Take care.
Thank you, Mark. Goodbye.